The lawyer had barely finished saying $7 when Sarah realized her father had found one last way to humiliate her. The room went quiet. Not shocked quiet. The kind of quiet people use when they are trying not to laugh. Sarah stared at the battered black Bible sitting in front of her. $7. That was her inheritance. Not the house, not the savings account, not even the old pickup truck her father had spent 20 years repairing in his garage. A $7 Bible. Across the conference table, her half-brother Mark covered his mouth, but the smile still showed. Then Richard Caldwell leaned back in his chair and looked Sarah straight in the eyes. "Your father always said you were good at turning nothing into a problem," he said. "Looks like he finally left you something you can afford." A couple of people laughed. Sarah didn't. She picked up the Bible. The leather was cracked. One corner had been repaired with a strip of brown tape. There was even a faint ring from an old coffee cup on the back cover. It looked worthless. Sarah had seen that word before. Worthless. Her ex-husband had used it during the divorce. The bank had used it when they rejected her loan. And 3 weeks earlier, her landlord had taped an eviction notice to the apartment door because Sarah was $4,280 behind on rent. Now her father was dead. Her marriage was over. Her savings were gone. And she had 8-year-old Lily waiting outside in a car that was 2 payments away from being repossessed. Sarah looked at Richard. "That's all he left me." Richard slid a folder across the table. "That's all that's worth giving you." She opened it. The folder contained a single page. A waiver. Sarah read the first paragraph, then the second. Her name appeared beside a reference to all claims relating to the deceased's remaining property. She looked up. "What property?" Mark stopped smiling. Richard's expression changed for less than a second. Then it was gone. "There isn't any property worth discussing." Sarah pushed the folder back. "You just said remaining property." Richard folded his hands. "Your father had debts." That was strange. Her father had worked at the same sheet metal factory for 31 years. He drove a 12-year-old Ford. He lived in the same small house where Sarah had grown up. He wasn't rich, but he wasn't drowning in debt either. Sarah knew that much. What kind of debts? Richard didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the Bible. "Take it and go home, Sarah." She looked down at the worn cover. Something about it bothered her. Not the inheritance. The way Richard wanted her to leave. Sarah picked up the Bible and stood. Mark laughed again. "Congratulations, sis. Try not to spend it all in one place." Sarah walked out. Lily was sitting in the back seat, coloring a purple horse across the page of a cheap notebook. "Did Grandpa leave us anything?" Sarah opened the driver's door. She looked at the Bible in her hand. "Yeah." Lily glanced up. "What?" Sarah hesitated. "A book." She put it on the passenger seat. Then she drove home. That night, after Lily fell asleep on the couch, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table. The apartment was almost empty. 2 cardboard boxes, 1 lamp, a refrigerator that rattled every 11 minutes. She opened the Bible. The first page had her father's handwriting. Not a verse, not a prayer, a date. August 24th, 2004. Sarah frowned. She turned the page. Another date. Then another. There were dozens. She kept turning. The pages became strangely thick near the middle. Sarah pressed her thumb against the paper. Something was inside. She pulled the Bible toward the kitchen light and ran her fingernail along the spine. A thin section of pages lifted. Behind them was a folded piece of yellowed paper. Sarah stopped breathing for a second. She unfolded it. It was a property deed. Her father's name was printed across the top. The property was called Oak Haven Farm. Sarah had never heard of it. Then she saw the purchase date. August 24th, 2004. The exact date written on the first page, 22 years ago. At the bottom of the deed, someone had written 6 words in red ink. Go there when they think you're alone. Sarah read it again. Then her phone rang. Richard Caldwell, at 11:47 at night. She stared at the screen. She didn't answer. A second call came immediately, then a text. Just give me the Bible, Sarah. Sarah slowly looked toward the dark hallway where Lily was sleeping. Richard called again. This time, Sarah answered. She said nothing. For 3 seconds, neither did he. Then Richard spoke quietly. You found the deed, didn't you? Sarah's hand tightened around the Bible. How do you know about the deed? Richard exhaled. Because your father wasn't supposed to leave it to you. The next morning, Sarah drove to Oak Haven Farm before sunrise. She hadn't told Mark. She hadn't told Richard. She hadn't even told Lily where they were going. The deed sat folded inside her purse, tucked beneath an old receipt from the grocery store. Every few minutes, Sarah reached down to make sure it was still there. The road out of town narrowed after 40 miles, then 30. Then there was no pavement at all. Lily slept against the passenger side window, her cheek pressed to the glass. Sarah glanced at her and lowered the radio. She had spent the entire night thinking about one sentence. Your father wasn't supposed to leave it to you. Not why. Not how Richard knew. Just that. At 9:13 that morning, Sarah had searched Oak Haven Farm online. There was almost nothing. No recent photographs, no property listing, no satellite image that showed a house. The county website listed the land as inactive agricultural property. Tax records showed something stranger. Someone had paid the property taxes every year for 22 years. The latest payment had been made 3 days after her father's death. Sarah had stared at that date for a long time. Her father was already dead. So who had paid the tax bill? By 11:30, the phone lost signal. By noon, Lily woke up. Are we there? Not yet. Where are we going? Sarah kept her eyes on the road. To see something Grandpa left us. Lily sat up. Is it money? Sarah almost smiled. I don't know. The road climbed through thick pine forest. A wooden sign appeared ahead. Oak Haven Road. The letters were faded almost white. Sarah slowed. Then she saw the gate. It stretched across the road, made from black iron that had rusted around the hinges. Ivy covered most of it. A new silver padlock held the chain together. Sarah stopped the car. For a few seconds, he simply stared. The deed said the property had been abandoned for nearly 15 years, but that lock was new, very new. Lily leaned forward between the seats. Mom? Stay here. Sarah got out. The forest was silent except for the ticking engine. She walked toward the gate and touched the padlock. Cold metal, no rust. Someone had locked it recently. Sarah looked up the road. Nothing. No house. No movement. Just trees. She returned to the car and opened the trunk. The tire iron was underneath the spare blanket. She carried it back to the gate. One strike, the lock held. Second strike, the chain snapped. Lily watched through the windshield. Sarah pulled the gate open. The hinges groaned. Beyond it, the dirt road disappeared between the trees. She got back into the car. Seat belt. Lily buckled herself. Sarah drove. The trees grew thicker. Then, after nearly a quarter mile, the forest suddenly opened. Sarah hit the brakes. Lily's mouth fell open. There was a farmhouse on the hill, not a ruin, not an abandoned shack. A huge white Victorian farmhouse with dark green shutters, a wraparound porch, and enough pasture behind it to stretch farther than Sarah could see. There was a red barn, a stone well, a detached garage, and a long gravel driveway that looked recently cleared. Sarah slowly stepped out of the car. She had spent years hearing that her father had nothing, that he had died with debts, that he had left behind an ordinary life. But this place was not ordinary, and someone had been maintaining it. Then Lily pointed toward the farmhouse. "Mom," Sarah turned. "What?" Lily was staring at the second-floor window. "There's somebody looking at us." Sarah looked up. The window was empty. She looked again. Nothing. Then she noticed something else. A curtain was moving. Not from the wind. The window was closed. Sarah reached for the deed inside her purse. The red handwriting suddenly looked different, not like a warning anymore, like an instruction. She looked at the farmhouse, and for the first time since finding the Bible, Sarah wondered whether her father had actually left her an inheritance, or whether he had left her a trap. Sarah didn't move. Neither did Lily. They stood beside the car, staring at the farmhouse window. The curtain stopped moving. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the front door opened. Sarah instinctively reached for Lily's hand. An old man stepped onto the porch. He was thin, maybe 75, wearing faded denim overalls and a brown wool coat despite the mild afternoon. His white hair was combed straight back. He didn't wave. He simply watched them. Sarah felt a strange pressure behind her eyes. There was something familiar about him, not his face, the way he stood. Her father used to stand exactly like that when he was waiting for someone to tell him the truth. The old man finally lifted one hand. "Sarah Mercer?" She froze. Lily moved closer. "How do you know my name?" The man walked down 2 porch steps. "Your father told me you'd come." Sarah looked at the farmhouse. "When?" The old man gave a tired smile. 3 weeks ago." Sarah stared at him. Her father had been dead for 9 days. The old man seemed to notice the confusion. "He came here before that." Sarah's voice tightened. "My father was sick for months." "I know. He couldn't have come here." The old man looked toward the road. "Your father didn't come here in person." That answer somehow made things worse. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out the deed. The old man's eyes dropped to it. For the first time, his expression changed. "You found it." Sarah nodded. "Who are you?" "My name is Walter Bell." He paused. "Your father called me Walt." Sarah had heard that name once, maybe twice, always during childhood. Her father used to mention a man named Walt who worked near the old county line. She had never seen him, not until now. Walter looked at Lily. "And that's your little girl?" Sarah stepped between them. "Don't." Walter raised both hands. "I mean no harm." "Then tell me why my father hid this place from me." Walter studied her for a long moment. "Because the last time he tried to tell you, somebody followed him." Sarah felt the words land harder than she expected. "Who?" Walter didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the farmhouse. "Come inside." Sarah didn't move. Walter sighed. "Your father left something in there that belongs to you." "What?" "A room." Sarah frowned. "A room?" Walter nodded. "He told me never to open it unless you arrived with that Bible." Sarah looked down. The battered Bible was still inside her purse. She hadn't shown it to him. "How did you know I had it?" Walter's face went pale. "Because I helped your father hide it." Sarah's fingers went numb around the deed. Walter walked toward the porch. After a moment, Sarah followed. Inside, the farmhouse smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. But there was something strange about the place. It wasn't dusty. There were fresh flowers on a kitchen table. A newspaper lay beside the sink. Yesterday's date. Sarah stopped. "Someone lives here." Walter kept walking. "No." He looked back at her. Someone visits. He led them down a narrow hallway. There were family photographs on the walls. Sarah glanced at the first one. Her father, young, maybe 28, standing beside a red tractor. She took another step. Another photograph. Her father holding a little girl. Sarah. She knew the dress immediately. Blue with tiny white flowers. She had worn it for her 6th birthday. Her father had been behind the camera that day. Sarah remembered. He had never been in the photograph. But here he was, holding her. Her throat tightened. "Where did you get this?" Walter looked at the picture. "Your father took it." He wasn't there. He was. Sarah turned toward him. "What are you talking about?" Walter's voice became quiet. "He was there for more of your childhood than you ever knew." Sarah stared at him. Then she noticed something beneath the photograph, a small brass plate. 3 words were engraved into it. "The Bible knows." Sarah stepped closer. Her father's handwriting appeared beneath the frame. The same red ink. The same 6 words from the deed. "Go there when they think you're alone." She looked at Walter. "Who is they?" Walter's answer came after a long silence. "The people who made your father disappear from your life." Sarah's mouth went dry. Her father hadn't abandoned her. At least, not completely. And somewhere inside this house was proof. Walter reached into his coat pocket and removed a small brass key. He held it out. "This opens the room." Sarah stared at the key, then at the locked door at the end of the hallway. A door she hadn't noticed before. There was no handle, only a keyhole. And beneath it, carved directly into the wood, were 4 numbers. 8-10-24-88. Sarah recognized them instantly. Her birthday. August 24th, 1988. Her father had used her birthday to lock the door. She took the key. Behind them, somewhere outside the farmhouse, gravel cracked beneath the slow weight of a vehicle. Walter's eyes shifted toward the window. His face changed. "Sarah," she turned. "Don't open that door yet." Another vehicle stopped outside. Then another. Walter whispered 2 words. "They found you." Sarah's first thought was Lily. She spun toward the front window. 2 dark SUVs sat beyond the iron gate. A 3rd vehicle was coming up the driveway. Nobody got out. For a few seconds, the farmhouse remained perfectly still. Walter moved quickly for a man his age. "Back door." Sarah grabbed Lily's hand. "What about the room?" "Not yet." "But my father—" "Your father won't care about that room if you're dead." The bluntness of it stopped her. Walter crossed the kitchen and opened a narrow door beside the pantry. Behind it was a steep wooden staircase leading downward. "Go!" Sarah pulled Lily inside. The door closed behind them. They descended into darkness. The stairs creaked beneath their weight, and Sarah kept one hand on Lily's shoulder so she wouldn't slip. At the bottom was a stone corridor barely wide enough for 2 people. Lily whispered, "Mom, what's happening?" "I don't know." That was the truth. Sarah had spent 9 days grieving a father she believed had died without fixing anything between them. Now she was hiding underground because strangers had followed her to a farm she had discovered inside a $7 Bible. None of it made sense. Walter appeared behind them with a flashlight. He shut the stairway door, then he locked it. "There's another way out," he whispered. "How long have you known about this place?" 22 years. Sarah stopped walking. 22? Walter nodded. "Your father bought the farm in 1999, but he didn't put his name on the deed until later." "Why?" "Because somebody was looking for him." Sarah stared at him. Who? Walter continued down the corridor. Richard Caldwell. Sarah stopped again. The name made her jaw tighten. Richard? Walter turned. Your father's business partner? My father's executor. Walter's expression hardened. He was never your father's friend. A faint sound came from above. The farmhouse door opening, then footsteps. Sarah instinctively pulled Lily closer. Walter raised one finger. Listen. The footsteps crossed the kitchen. Slow, unhurried. Someone was searching the house. Sarah's mind went back to Richard's phone call. Just give me the Bible, Sarah. She hadn't told him about the deed. She hadn't told him about Oak Haven. So how had he known? The answer frightened her more than the footsteps. Someone had been watching her. Walter continued through the corridor until they reached a wooden door. He unlocked it. Beyond it was a small underground room with shelves lining every wall. Boxes filled the shelves, old newspapers, property records, photographs, hard drives. Sarah walked inside. What is all this? Walter shut the door. Your father spent 22 years collecting evidence. Evidence of what? Walter looked at Lily, then back at Sarah. Why he couldn't come home. Sarah opened the nearest box. The first thing she found was a photograph. She knew the place immediately. Her elementary school. The picture had been taken from across the street. Sarah was 6 years old. Her father was standing beside her. Not in the picture. Behind the camera. Her fingers began to shake. She opened another box. More photographs. Sarah at 11. Sarah at 14. Sarah at her high school graduation. Then one from her wedding day. Her father wasn't there. Sarah remembered that. She had spent years believing he simply hadn't cared enough to attend. But beneath the photograph was a handwritten date, June 17, 2012, and beneath it, I was 300 yards away. Sarah covered her mouth. Walter watched her quietly. He came to your wedding? He watched from a car. Why? Because someone was watching him. Sarah looked at the photographs again. There were hundreds. Her entire life had been documented from a distance. Then she found one that made her stop. It showed Sarah and Lily outside their apartment, taken only 4 weeks earlier. Sarah turned toward Walter. Who took this? Walter didn't answer. She looked at the date. March 3rd. The photograph had been taken at 7:42 in the morning. Her father had died 9 days ago. Sarah slowly lowered the photograph. He was still watching us. Walter shook his head. No. His voice was barely audible. He wasn't. A heavy thump came from somewhere above them. Both of them froze. Walter looked towards the ceiling. Then he said something Sarah hadn't expected. Your father wasn't the one taking those last photographs. Another sound, closer this time. A floorboard creaked above the hidden room. Walter switched off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed them. Sarah held Lily against her chest. Then a man's voice drifted through the floorboards. Sarah. She knew that voice. Richard Caldwell. And he was standing inside the farmhouse. Richard Caldwell's voice came again from upstairs. Sarah. She held Lily's mouth gently with one hand. The girl was trembling. Walter crouched beside them and whispered, He knows the house. He doesn't know this room. Sarah shook her head. How can you be sure? I built the door. Another floorboard creaked. Richard was moving through the hallway. Sarah looked at the boxes around her. 22 years of evidence. Her father's hidden life. Photographs of her childhood. And now Richard was inside the farmhouse looking for the same thing. What does he want? Walter looked at the Bible in Sarah's hand. The original deed. Sarah stared at him. I have it. I know. Then why didn't my father destroy it? Because the deed isn't the valuable part. Walter reached beneath a shelf and pulled out a thin metal box. He placed it on the floor. Inside was a photograph of Oak Haven Farm. But the photograph was old. The farmhouse looked different. There was no red barn, no gravel driveway, only an enormous stretch of pasture. Walter pointed to a small circle drawn in black ink near the center of the property. Your father found something under this land. Sarah leaned closer. What? A water survey. She frowned. That doesn't explain why Richard wants the farm. It does when you know what was found underneath it. Walter opened another file. Inside were geological maps. Sarah recognized the county name. She looked at the numbers, then at Walter. How much? Your father estimated the land was worth $38 million. Sarah stared at him. The number didn't feel real. Walter continued. But money wasn't the reason he bought it. What was? The water. He unfolded another document. The map showed underground aquifers running beneath several counties. Most were contaminated. Oak Haven sat above the only clean reserve. A bottled water company had already signed a preliminary agreement to purchase the surrounding land. Richard Caldwell owned that company. Sarah felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. So, that's it? No. Walter's expression changed. There's more. He pulled out a second photograph. This one showed Richard standing beside Sarah's father. Both men were younger. Behind them stood a drilling rig. Sarah recognized the location. Oak Haven. Her father had been there, but the date on the photograph was 24 years earlier, before the farm was supposedly purchased. Sarah looked at Walter. Why was my father drilling here before he owned it? Walter didn't answer. The footsteps above stopped. Silence. Then came 3 slow knocks on the floor. Sarah looked up. Richard's voice followed. I know you're down there. Lily squeezed Sarah's hand. Richard continued. You don't understand what you've inherited. Sarah said nothing. I can make this easy. Walter whispered, Don't answer. Richard waited. Then he spoke again. $200,000. Sarah looked at Walter. His face had gone rigid. Richard laughed softly above them. That's more than the farm is worth on paper. Sarah finally understood. He wasn't guessing. He knew. He knew about the farm. He knew about the deed. And he had come prepared to buy her silence. Richard's voice softened. Take the money, Sarah. Pay your debts. Get Lily somewhere safe. You can forget this place ever existed. Sarah looked down at the $7 Bible. Her father had spent 22 years hiding this farm. He had watched her life from a distance. He had missed birthdays. He had missed her wedding. He had missed the birth of his granddaughter. And now the man who might have been responsible for all of it was offering her $200,000 to walk away. Sarah stood. Walter grabbed her wrist. What are you doing? She looked toward the ceiling. Then she answered, No. The silence above lasted several seconds. Richard finally spoke. You should have taken the money. A crash shook the house. Glass shattered somewhere upstairs. Walter's eyes widened. They're breaking in. Sarah pulled Lily closer. Who? Walter looked at the hidden room's second exit. Not Richard's lawyers. He grabbed the metal box. His security men. Then he pointed toward a narrow passage behind the shelves. Move. Sarah followed him into the darkness. Behind them, the hidden door began to shake. Once, twice. Then the lock splintered, and someone shouted from the other side. "Find the girl!" Walter pulled Sarah through the narrow passage just as the hidden door gave way behind them. A man's flashlight swept across the room. "Check every box!" Sarah kept one hand around Lily's wrist and followed Walter through the darkness. The passage smelled of damp stone and old timber. It sloped downward, then turned sharply beneath the farmhouse. "How far does this go?" Sarah whispered. "Far enough." Behind them, boots struck the floor. One of the men shouted, "They're gone!" Walter pushed open a wooden hatch. Cold daylight spilled across the tunnel floor. They emerged behind the old barn. Sarah immediately crouched beside Lily. "Stay here." "No." Sarah looked at her daughter. Lily's face was pale. "I'm coming with you. You're not leaving me." The words stopped Sarah. She pulled Lily into her arms. "Okay, stay close." They moved behind the barn. Walter pointed toward a weathered pickup parked near the tree line. "My truck." Sarah looked back at the farmhouse. 2 men were now outside. One was holding something in his hand. A photograph. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was the picture of her and Lily outside their apartment. "They know who we are," she whispered. Walter nodded. "And they know what scares you." A vehicle engine roared near the farmhouse. Richard's black SUV started toward them. "Get in." Walter opened the truck door. Sarah climbed into the passenger seat with Lily beside her. The truck lurched forward. They tore down the back road, branches scraping against the windows. Sarah looked behind them. The SUV was following. Walter drove faster. "How long has Richard been doing this?" "Longer than you think." "Why didn't my father go to the police?" Walter gripped the steering wheel. "Because he did." Sarah stared at him. "What?" "3 times. And?" "The first officer disappeared from the investigated." "Enfin," Sarah's mouth went dry. "The second one sold the evidence." "And the third?" Walter looked at her. "Your father stopped trusting anyone." The road widened. The SUV was still behind them. Sarah opened the metal box Walter had carried from the farmhouse. Inside were 3 things: a bank receipt, a small brass key, and a folded photograph. The receipt showed a payment of $41,000. Sarah recognized the account number. It belonged to her. "What is this?" Walter glanced at it. "Your father opened that account when you were 18. Sarah stared at him. "There should be no money in it." There wasn't. She unfolded the photograph. It showed her father standing outside a bank. Beside him was a younger Richard Caldwell. On the back, her father's handwriting read, "He knows about the account." Sarah looked at Walter. "What account?" Walter didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "The one your father used to pay for your life without you knowing." Sarah felt a strange ache in her chest. Her college tuition. Her first apartment. Lily's hospital bill when she was born. She had always believed those expenses had been paid by loans. Her father had apparently been behind them. But why hide it? The SUV suddenly pulled alongside them. Richard was driving. He lowered his window. "Sarah!" Walter accelerated. Richard shouted something she couldn't hear. Then he threw a small black object through the open window. It landed near Sarah's feet. A phone. Sarah stared at it. The screen lit up. One new message. From Dad. She stopped breathing. The phone couldn't be her father's. He had been dead for 9 days. Another message appeared. "Don't trust Walter." Sarah slowly turned toward the old man driving. Walter saw the screen. His face changed. Where did you get that? It was thrown into the truck. Walter's hands tightened around the steering wheel. The phone buzzed again. A second message appeared. He was the one who helped me disappear. Sarah looked at Walter. He said nothing. For the first time since they left Oak Haven, the old man's silence frightened her more than Richard's pursuit. Sarah stared at the phone. The message remained on the screen. He was the one who helped me disappear. She looked at Walter. Who is he talking about? Walter kept driving. Your father. That isn't what I asked. His jaw tightened. Sarah reached for the door handle. Stop the truck. Walter didn't. Stop the truck. Still nothing. Sarah grabbed the steering wheel. Walter swerved onto the shoulder and slammed the brakes. Lily cried out. Sarah turned on him. You're going to tell me everything. Walter stared through the windshield. For several seconds, only the engine ticked. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. It was old, yellow around the edges. Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately, her father's. He gave me this 6 years ago, Walter said. Why? He knew he wouldn't be able to explain it himself. Sarah took the envelope. Her name was written across the front. Sarah. She looked at Walter. You had this all this time? I was told not to give it to you unless Richard found Oak Haven. Sarah opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed her father standing beside a much younger Walter. Behind them was a black sedan. Sarah recognized the car. Richard Caldwell had owned one exactly like it. She turned the photograph over. There were 4 words written on the back. He saved your life. Sarah read them again. What does this mean? Walter finally looked at her. Your father didn't disappear because he wanted to leave you. Then why? Because Richard found out your father had evidence against him. What evidence? Bank transfers, land purchases, bribes. Sarah's eyes narrowed. And the farm? Walter nodded. Your father bought Oak Haven because the land was connected to everything Richard had been hiding. Sarah looked at the phone. The message had disappeared. Only the low screen remained, a photograph of Lily. Sarah's blood ran cold. Why does Richard have a picture of my daughter? Walter didn't answer. A car passed them on the highway. Sarah watched it disappear. Then she noticed something scratched into the dashboard. 3 words. The Bible knows. She touched the carving. Why is that here? Walter looked down. I didn't put it there. Sarah looked toward the back seat. Lily was staring at something outside the window. Mom, Sarah turned. What? There are 2 cars behind us. Walter checked the mirror. His face hardened. Hold on. He pulled back onto the highway. The first car followed, then the second. Sarah's phone vibrated. This time it wasn't a message. An incoming call. The number was blocked. She answered. Hello? Static. Then a man's voice. Not Richard. Not Walter. Her father's voice. Sarah, if you're hearing this, don't go home. She stopped breathing. Lily looked at her. Mom? The recording continued. Your house is being watched. Sarah pressed the phone against her ear. Dad? A pause. Then his voice again. You have 48 hours. The call ended. Sarah stared at the blank screen. Walter pulled off the highway onto a narrow country road. Where are we going? To the only place Richard doesn't know about. Where? Walter looked at her. Your father's first house. Sarah frowned. My father only had 1 house. Walter shook his head. No. He drove deeper into the trees. He had another one. Sarah looked down at the Bible in her lap. For the first time, she noticed something she had missed. The inside cover wasn't black. It was dark green, and pressed into the leather was a tiny symbol, a farmhouse with a circle beneath it. The same symbol appeared on the deed. And on the photograph. Sarah whispered, "What did my father leave me?" Walter's answer was almost too quiet to hear. "Not a farm." He looked at her. "A way out." The house was less than an hour away. Walter drove without speaking. Sarah kept the Bible open on her lap. She had stopped counting the questions. Why had her father watched her? Why had he paid bills without telling her? Why had he disappeared? And why did Richard Caldwell seem to know about every secret before she did? The road ended at an old farmhouse hidden behind a line of cedar trees. It looked nothing like Oak Haven. Smaller, older, almost forgotten. Walter turned off the engine. "This is where your father lived before you were born." Sarah stared at the house. "I've never seen it." "He didn't want you to." They stepped inside. The place smelled of dust and pine wood. There was almost no furniture. A table, 2 chairs, an old iron stove, and a wall covered with handwritten dates. Sarah walked closer. They were all birthdays. Her birthday, her mother's birthday, Lily's birthday. Then she saw another name, her own. Beside it was a date 22 years earlier. Sarah touched the wall. Why did he write all this? Walter stood behind her. Because he was keeping track of the people he couldn't protect. Sarah turned. What happened to my mother? Walter looked away. Sarah had asked that question many times as a child. Her father always said the same thing. She left. Sarah had believed him. For 28 years. Now Walter finally spoke. Your mother didn't leave. Sarah's face changed. What? She was trying to leave Richard. Sarah stepped backward. My mother knew Richard? She worked for one of his companies. Walter walked toward an old cabinet. He found out she had discovered the financial records your father was investigating. Sarah felt dizzy. Why didn't Dad tell me? Because your mother disappeared before he could. Sarah's voice broke. Disappeared? Walter nodded. She wasn't dead. Sarah stared at him. What happened to her? Walter opened the cabinet. Inside was a small cassette recorder. He pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a woman's voice. Sarah froze. She knew that voice. She had heard it only in old recordings. Her mother. Daniel, if Sarah ever hears this, tell her I didn't leave because I stopped loving her. Sarah covered her mouth. The recording continued. I left because they threatened her. A long pause. Then her mother's voice became quieter. Richard knows about the farm. Sarah looked at Walter. The tape clicked. Her mother continued. Daniel, if you can't protect her, take her somewhere he can't find her. The recording ended. Sarah stood completely still. Her entire childhood had been built around one lie. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. Her father hadn't abandoned her either. They had both been trying to keep her alive. Then Sarah noticed something beside the recorder. A small envelope. Her name was written across it. But underneath her name was another sentence. Open this only after you find the second deed. Sarah looked at Walter. Second deed? He nodded. Your father split the property into 2 parts. Why? Because he knew one deed could be stolen. Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph of Oak Haven Farm. On the back was a handwritten instruction. Look beneath the place where Sarah learned to walk. Sarah frowned. Then she remembered. The photograph showed a room in the farmhouse, a small sunroom. Her father had once told her that she had taken her first steps there. Sarah looked at Walter. The sunroom. Walter nodded. But there's a problem. What? The floor was replaced 12 years ago. Sarah's phone vibrated. A message appeared. Richard, you have 6 hours. Then another. I know where you are. Sarah stared at the screen. Walter Q. Whitley locked the front door. Then we have less time than I thought. Sarah didn't sleep that night. At 3:17 in the morning, she was still sitting at the kitchen table of the old farmhouse, staring at the words her father had left behind. Look beneath the place where Sarah learned to walk. The sunroom. But the sunroom no longer existed. Walter had shown her the old property plans. 12 years earlier, someone had removed the original floor and replaced it with concrete. Who replaced it? Sarah asked. Walter looked at the paperwork. Richard Caldwell. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Why? He said there was water damage. Sarah looked at the ceiling. There was no sign of a leak. Then she noticed something on the old blueprint, a small square beneath the sunroom. Not a basement, not a crawl space, a room. Sarah pointed at it. What is that? Walter went silent. That's not on the current plans. No. Why? Because your father sealed it. Sarah looked at him. What was inside? Walter's expression hardened. I don't know. For the first time, Sarah realized Walter had been telling the truth about some things, but not everything. At sunrise, they drove back to Oak Haven. The farmhouse looked peaceful from the outside. Too peaceful. The SUVs were gone. The gate stood open. Sarah immediately knew something was wrong. They want us to go inside, Walter said. Why? Because they want you to find something. Sarah looked at the Bible, then at the house. She understood. Richard didn't need to chase her anymore. He wanted her to open the door for him. They entered through the kitchen. Nothing appeared disturbed. No broken glass, no overturned furniture. Then Sarah saw the hallway. Every photograph was gone. Hundreds of photographs, removed from the walls, except one. A picture of Sarah at 6 years old. She walked toward it. Behind the frame was a small brass key. Sarah pulled it free. Walter stared at it. Your father used that key once. Where? Walter pointed toward the sunroom. Sarah walked inside. The room was almost empty. New concrete covered the floor. She crouched. The key had a number stamped into it. She ran her fingers over the concrete. There. A faint rectangular outline. Someone had tried to hide it. Sarah looked at Walter. We're breaking the floor. Walter nodded. They found a hammer in the garage. It took 20 minutes. Then Sarah heard it. A hollow sound. She froze. She struck the concrete again. Hollow. Walter knelt beside her. Move. He broke through the thin surface. Beneath it was a metal hatch. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled it open. A staircase descended into darkness. The hidden room was still there, and someone had been inside recently. There were fresh footprints in the dust. Sarah followed them. At the bottom was a steel cabinet, locked. The brass key opened it. Inside was a thick black ledger, a passport, a bank card, and a sealed envelope. Sarah picked up the passport first. Her breath caught. The photograph wasn't her father's. It was her mother's. Name, Elena Mercer. Status, alive. Sarah dropped the passport. No. Walter didn't move. Sarah picked it up again. The expiration date was only 8 months away. Her mother hadn't disappeared 28 years ago. Someone had been renewing her passport. Recently, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Her mother was standing beside a woman Sarah had never seen before. On the back was a date, 3 weeks ago. Sarah's hands began trembling. Then she saw the handwritten sentence beneath it. "She knows what happened to your father." A sound came from above. A door slammed. Sarah looked at Walter. He was staring toward the staircase. Then, a voice echoed down from the sunroom. "Sarah." She knew that voice. Not Richard. Not Mark. Not anyone she had heard in years. A woman's voice. Older, shaking, but unmistakable. "Sarah, it's Mom." Sarah couldn't breathe. Walter whispered, "Your father knew she was alive." Sarah looked toward the stairs. Then another voice came from upstairs. "Richard, you finally found her." The lights went out. For 3 seconds, Sarah could hear nothing but her own breathing. Then Lily screamed. "Mom!" Sarah reached for her daughter in the darkness. "I'm here!" Walter's flashlight flickered once, then died. Somewhere above them, footsteps moved across the sunroom. Slow. Careful. Someone was coming down the stairs. Sarah grabbed the passport and shoved it into her jacket. Walter whispered, "There's another exit." "Where?" "Behind the cabinet." He pulled the steel cabinet away from the wall. A narrow opening appeared behind it. Sarah pushed Lily through first, then Walter. Before Sarah followed, she looked back toward the staircase. A beam of light appeared. Someone was descending. "Sarah?" Her mother's voice again, this time closer. Sarah froze. She had imagined this moment thousands of times as a child. Her mother walking through the front door. Her mother saying she was sorry. Her mother explaining why she left. But never like this. Never while hiding underground from armed men. "Sarah," the voice whispered. Sarah stepped toward the stairs. Walter caught her arm. "Don't." "She said my name." "I know." A man's voice suddenly came from behind the woman's voice. "That's enough, Eleanor." Sarah's blood ran cold. Richard. Her mother was with him. Or he had found her. Sarah backed into the passage. Walter pulled the cabinet closed. They crawled through the narrow tunnel until they reached another wooden door. Walter opened it. They emerged inside the old barn. Sarah immediately looked toward the farmhouse. 3 men stood on the porch. Richard was in the middle. Beside him stood a woman with grey hair. Sarah couldn't see her face clearly, but she knew. She knew before the woman turned. Her mother. Eleanor. Sarah's knees nearly gave out. Lily whispered, "Is that Grandma?" Sarah couldn't answer. Richard looked toward the bar. He smiled. "She found you." Sarah's mother turned. Their eyes met across the pasture. For a moment, neither moved. Then Eleanor's face broke. "Sarah." She started walking toward them. Richard grabbed her arm. "Not yet." Sarah stepped forward. "You're alive." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I've been trying to get back to you." Sarah laughed bitterly. 28 years. Elena lowered her head. "Your father wouldn't let me." That sentence hit harder than anything Richard had said. Sarah looked at Walter. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "What did he do?" Elena shook her head. "He saved me." Sarah stared at her. "Then why did he let me hate both of you?" Elena's voice cracked. "Because the first time Richard found me, he threatened to kill you." Sarah looked at Richard. He didn't deny it. Instead, He slowly smiled. Your father made a deal. Sarah's mother closed her eyes. He agreed to disappear from your life. Sarah's throat tightened. And you? I agreed to stay gone. For 28 years. Eleanor nodded. Sarah felt tears running down her face. All those birthdays. All those unanswered letters. Every night she'd wondered why neither parent had come back. They had been alive, watching, waiting, and staying away. Richard stepped forward. Now you understand. Sarah looked at him. No. Her voice was quiet. You're still lying. Richard's smile disappeared. Sarah held up the black ledger. This is why you came. Richard's eyes moved to it. Then his face changed. For the first time, Sarah saw fear. Real fear. She opened the ledger. Inside were years of payments. Names, companies, bank transfers. And hundreds of millions of dollars moved through shell accounts. At the bottom of the final page was one signature. Richard Caldwell. Sarah looked at her mother. What happened to Dad? Elena began crying. He wasn't killed. Sarah stopped. He's alive? Elena shook her head. No. She pointed toward the ledger. Your father died trying to expose this. Sarah looked at the final entry. It was dated 9 days before his death. One payment. Sevens. Sarah stared at it. The same amount as her inheritance. Then she understood. The Bible hadn't been worth $7. Her father had deliberately made it look that way. The $7 were a message, a code, and the ledger contained the other half. Richard suddenly pulled a gun from beneath his coat. Walter stepped in front of Sarah. Richard raised it. Give me the ledger. Sarah held it tighter. No. Richard's finger moved toward the trigger. Then Elena stepped between them. Richard. He looked at her. You've already taken 28 years from her. Elena's voice shook. You're not taking the rest. And behind Richard, sirens suddenly began echoing through the trees. Richard turned toward the sound of the sirens. For the first time, the confidence disappeared from his face. He looked at Elena, then at Walter, then at Sarah. You called them? Elena shook her head. Sarah looked at Walter. He slowly smiled. No. Richard took a step backward. The sirens grew louder. Then a helicopter appeared above the tree line. Its spotlight swept across the farmhouse. Richard's security men scattered. One ran toward the barn. Another dropped his weapon and raised both hands. Richard grabbed Elena by the arm. Come with me. Elena pulled away. No. You don't understand what happens if they get that ledger. They already have it. Sarah held up the black ledger. Richard stared at her. You think this proves anything? Sarah opened it. Maybe not by itself. She pulled the silver USB drive from her pocket. But my father thought ahead. Richard's face went pale. Sarah remembered the note hidden inside the Bible. The Bible knows. The $7 inheritance wasn't the fortune. It was the key. Her father had split the evidence between 3 places: the Bible, the ledger, and the farm. Sarah looked at Walter. What did he put on the drive? Walter smiled sadly. Everything. Richard suddenly turned and ran. Sarah watched him disappear toward the woods. Then she heard a sharp crack. Not a gunshot. A branch breaking. Richard had stopped. A police officer stepped from behind the trees. "Richard Caldwell." Richard slowly raised his hands. Two more officers surrounded him. Sarah stood frozen. She had spent years believing powerful people always escaped consequences. Her father had taught her otherwise, just not in the way she expected. An officer approached Sarah. "Are you Sarah Mercer?" "Yes." "We received an anonymous evidence package this morning." Sarah looked at Walter. He nodded. "Your father arranged it before he died." The officer held out a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a small handwritten note. Sarah recognized the handwriting instantly. She opened it with shaking fingers. "If you're reading this, Sarah, the truth finally has somewhere safe to go." She swallowed. There was more. "I know you think I abandoned you. I know you think your mother abandoned you. I know there were years when you needed us, and we weren't there. I'm sorry." Sarah's vision blurred. She kept reading. "But there is something I need you to know. I never stopped being your father. Every birthday I missed, I was there. Every bill you thought you paid alone, I helped. Every time you thought nobody was watching over you, someone was. I wanted to come home. More than anything. But coming home would have put you in danger." Sarah lowered the note. Her mother was crying. Lily ran toward Elena. For a moment, Elena didn't move. Then she dropped to her knees. Lily threw her arms around her. Sarah watched them. Her daughter was hugging a grandmother she had never known. And Sarah was standing there with a letter from the father she had spent years resenting. The police led Richard away, but before he disappeared into the trees, he turned back. "Sarah!" She looked at him. "You don't know what you've inherited." Sarah almost laughed. "I think I finally do." Richard shook his head. "No." He looked toward Oakhaven. "You inherited the land." His expression darkened. "And that's worth far more than money." Sarah turned toward the farmhouse. She suddenly remembered what her father had written on the original deed. Oakhaven wasn't just a farm, it was the only clean water reserve left in the county, and Richard had spent decades trying to control it. The officer approached Sarah again. "There is one more thing." "What?" "The county assessor just finished a preliminary valuation." Sarah waited. He looked at the paperwork. "Oakhaven Farm is worth approximately $42 million. Sarah stared at him. 42 million. The same farm everyone had called worthless. The same farm Richard had offered her $200,000 to abandon. The same farm her father had hidden inside a $7 Bible. Sarah looked toward the hill. Then she noticed something she'd never seen before. A small wooden sign near the pasture. It had one word carved into it. Mercer. Her father's name. Sarah walked toward it. Behind the sign was a small stone bench. On the bench sat another envelope. Her name was on it. But this time, there was no warning. Only 3 words. For your future, Sarah. She opened it. Inside was the final deed, and beneath it, a photograph of her father holding a newborn Lily. On the back, he had written, "I couldn't be there, but I was." Sarah pressed the photograph against her chest. For the first time in 28 years, she stopped wondering why her father had left. She finally understood. He hadn't left her. He had left something behind. a home, a future. And the truth. The news spread through the county within 48 hours. Oak Haven Farm was no longer considered abandoned. It was now the most valuable piece of undeveloped land in the region. But Sarah didn't care about the headlines. She cared about the house, about the photographs, about the room beneath the sunroom, and most of all, about the $7 Bible sitting on her kitchen table. 3 days after Richard's arrest, Sarah returned to Oak Haven alone. The farmhouse looked different in daylight, not frightening, not mysterious, just old. She walked through the hallway where hundreds of photographs had once hung. Most had been taken into evidence, but one remained. The picture of her at 6 years old. Sarah removed it from the wall. Behind it was a small envelope. Her father's handwriting. She opened it. "You may be wondering why I left the photographs." Sarah smiled through tears. "I wanted you to know that I never stopped looking." There was another line. "Your mother wasn't the only person I had to protect you from." Sarah stopped reading. She looked toward the window. Outside, Lily was running across the pasture with Elena. Then Sarah noticed something beneath the letter, a newspaper clipping. It was dated 24 years earlier. The headline read, "Local accountant disappears after reporting financial irregularities." The photograph beside the headline was her father. Sarah had never known. She read the article slowly. Her father had tried to expose Richard's company. 3 days later, he vanished. The police had assumed he had fled, but according to the final paragraph, one witness had seen him being forced into a black sedan. The witness? Walter Bell. Sarah sat down. So Walter hadn't merely helped her father disappear. He had helped him survive. And for 22 years, he had protected the evidence. Sarah closed her eyes. Suddenly, a memory returned. She was 8 years old, standing outside her school. A man in a brown coat had handed her a red balloon. Her father had appeared from nowhere. He had grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her away. She had cried. She had thought he was angry. Now she understood. He had been terrified. Sarah folded the newspaper. Then she noticed another document beneath it. A property transfer. Oak Haven had not been purchased solely for its land value. Her father had placed it into a trust, and Sarah was the sole beneficiary. But there was a condition. She could not sell the land. Not for 25 years. Sarah stared at the document. Her father had planned far beyond his own lifetime. He hadn't wanted her to become rich. He wanted the land protected, because beneath Oak Haven was the clean aquifer. If Richard's company controlled it, thousands of families would eventually depend on him for their drinking water. Sarah understood the final piece. Her father hadn't hidden a fortune. He had hidden something more important. A future that couldn't be bought. That evening, Sarah sat on the porch with Lily. Elena brought out 3 cups of tea. For the first time, the 3 of them sat together as a family. It was awkward. Painful. There were 28 years that couldn't be erased. Sarah still had questions. Elena still had regrets, but nobody left. Lily looked at the farmhouse. "Are we going to live here?" Sarah smiled. "I think Grandpa wanted us to." Elena looked toward the pasture. "He wanted you to have a home he couldn't give you when you were little." Sarah looked at the Bible on the table. The cover was still cracked, still stained, still worth almost nothing. She opened it one last time. Behind the final page was a small handwritten note she hadn't noticed before. $7 was never the inheritance. The inheritance was knowing why. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She finally understood why her father had left her a Bible instead of money. He knew money could be stolen, land could be taken, documents could disappear. But the truth, once discovered, could change everything. Sarah closed the Bible. Then she looked across the pasture. The sun was setting behind Oak Haven. For 28 years, she had believed her father had abandoned her. Now she knew the truth. He had spent those same 28 years trying to make sure she would have somewhere safe to come home to. And in the end, he had succeeded. The woman who inherited a $7 Bible had walked into a forgotten farmhouse, expecting nothing. She walked out with a $42 million property. A family she thought she had lost, and the one thing her father had wanted her to have all along. A home. For the first time since discovering the Bible, Sarah thought the mystery was over. Richard was in custody. The evidence had been turned over. Oak Haven belonged to her, and her mother was finally sitting beside her daughter and granddaughter. But the following morning, Sarah received a call from the county recorder. "There's a problem with the deed." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What kind of problem?" "The original transfer is valid, but there's an older document attached to the property." "What does it say?" The recorder hesitated. "It says your father wasn't the first owner." Sarah drove to the courthouse immediately. The document was more than 50 years old. Oak Haven had once belonged to a small group of local families. The land had been sold under pressure after the county announced plans to build an industrial plant nearby. But the plant was never built. Instead, the land was quietly purchased through shell companies. Richard's company had acquired most of the surrounding properties, except Oak Haven. Sarah finally understood why Richard had been so desperate. Her father's farm wasn't valuable because of what was sitting on it. It was valuable because it was the one piece of land Richard could never legally control. Then she noticed something at the bottom of the document, a list of names. One of them was her mother's. Sarah stared at it. Her mother had been an original beneficiary of the property trust. She hadn't simply been hiding from Richard. She had been protecting a legal claim to Oak Haven. Sarah drove home and confronted Eleanor. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elena looked at the document. Then she began crying. "Because your father made me promise." "Promise what?" "That if he died before the truth came out, I would let you discover it yourself." Sarah shook her head. "You both made decisions for me my entire life." "I know. And I spent years thinking nobody wanted me." Elena reached for her hand. "We wanted you more than anything." Sarah pulled away. "Then you should have trusted me." Silence filled the room. Then Elena nodded. "You're right." It was the first time anyone had said it without making excuses. Sarah sat down. For 28 years, she had wanted an explanation. Not a fortune, not revenge, just the truth. And now she finally had it. Her father hadn't been perfect. Her mother hadn't been perfect. But neither had abandoned her willingly. They had made terrible choices while trying to protect her. Sarah looked toward Lily. She knew exactly what she would do differently. She would never make her daughter live inside a lie just because the truth was difficult. That night, Sarah returned to the old farmhouse. She walked into her father's study. On the desk was one final envelope. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, you've probably discovered everything." Sarah smiled through her tears. The final line was simple. "Now you get to decide what kind of inheritance this becomes." Sarah folded the letter. She finally understood. Her father hadn't spent 22 years protecting a fortune. He had been protecting a choice. And now that choice belonged to her, 6 months later, Sarah could have sold Oak Haven. The offer was enormous, far more than $42 million. Developers wanted the land, private investors wanted the water rights, and several companies wanted Sarah to sign contracts that would make her wealthy for the rest of her life. She refused every one. Instead, she created the Oak Haven Trust. The clean aquifer would remain protected. A portion of the farm would become a community agricultural program. Another section would provide affordable housing for families struggling to stay in the county. Sarah remembered what it felt like to choose between rent and groceries. She remembered Lily asking why they couldn't have a normal home. She remembered the eviction notice, so she made sure other families wouldn't have to live through the same fear. The old farmhouse became a home again, not a fortress, not a secret headquarters, a home. Elena moved into the guest cottage. Lily chose the upstairs bedroom overlooking the pasture, and Sarah kept her father's study exactly as it was. One evening, she found Walter sitting on the porch. He was holding the old Bible. Sarah smiled. "You stole my inheritance." Walter laughed. "Your father asked me to keep it safe." Sarah sat beside him. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because your father made me promise." She looked at him. "Everybody in my life made promises for me." Walter nodded. "Your father knew that was his biggest mistake." Sarah looked toward the sunset. "What did he say about me?" Walter smiled. "He said you were stubborn." Sarah laughed. "That sounds like him." "He also said you were stronger than he was." That made her quiet. Walter handed her the Bible. "There was something he wanted you to know." Sarah opened it. Inside the back cover was a final photograph. Her father, Sarah. Lily. It had been taken from a distance, but this time Sarah recognized the location, Oak Haven. The three of them had been standing together without knowing he was there. On the back were 5 words. "I was always close enough." Sarah closed her eyes. For the first time, the words didn't hurt. They healed something. Her father had missed moments. He couldn't give her those years back. But he had left her something bigger than money. He had left her proof that she had always mattered. Sarah looked at Lily running through the grass. Then she looked at her mother, then at the farmhouse. The inheritance was no longer a secret. It was a beginning. 1 year after her father's death, Sarah returned to the lawyer's office. The same room, the same table. But this time she wasn't sitting there as a desperate divorced mother waiting to hear what little she had inherited. She was there to close the final chapter. Richard Caldwell had been convicted after investigators uncovered years of financial fraud, illegal land transfers, bribery, and evidence tampering. The evidence from Oak Haven had connected everything: the shell companies, the hidden accounts, the stolen properties, and the people who had been threatened into silence. Richard had built an empire by convincing ordinary people that their homes and land were worthless. Her father had spent 22 years making sure one piece of that land would never belong to him. Sarah opened the battered Bible. The lawyer looked at it. "Still carrying that?" Sarah smiled. "Everywhere." She placed it on the table. The lawyer laughed. "Do you know what it's actually worth?" Sarah shook her head. $7? According to the original appraisal. Sarah smiled. "Then I guess it still is. Because the Bible itself had never been valuable. The hidden deed was. The farm was. The water beneath it was. The evidence was. But none of those things were the reason Sarah kept it. She kept it because it had been the last thing her father had placed in her hands, the last message from a man she thought had forgotten her. the last proof that he had been thinking about her even when she believed he wasn't. That evening, Sarah stood on the Oak Haven porch. Lily sat beside her. Elena was in the garden. The sun was disappearing behind the hills. Lily looked at the Bible. "Mom? Yeah? Was Grandpa rich?" Sarah thought about the question. Then she smiled. "No." Lily looked confused. "But he left us the farm." Sarah looked across the fields. "He left us something better." "What?" "A choice." Lily didn't understand. Not yet. Sarah opened the Bible one final time. Inside the cover was her father's handwriting. $7 was never the inheritance. The inheritance was knowing why. Sarah closed the Bible. She looked toward the farmhouse. For years, she had thought her father's final act was leaving. It wasn't. His final act was making sure she would never have to feel abandoned again. The woman who walked into a lawyer's office with nothing but a $7 Bible had walked out with a hidden fortune. But the money wasn't what changed her life. The farm wasn't. The $42 million wasn't. The truth was. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't the thing someone leaves behind. It's finally understanding why they did. And Sarah would spend the rest of her life making sure her daughter never had to wonder,